The house is quieter than I remember. It's the kind of quiet that settles into your bones. The kind that makes you wonder if the walls themselves are holding their breath. I sit at the old oak table, the one that's seen decades of laughter, arguments, and secrets, and I cradle a chipped porcelain cup between my hands. The tea inside is still hot, steam curling up in lazy spirals, carrying with it the faint scent of bergamot and something older, maybe memory itself. Outside, the world is moving on. I can hear the distant hum of a lawnmower, the occasional bark of a neighbor's dog, but inside, time seems to have folded in on itself. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticks steadily, each second a gentle reminder that life, no matter how still it feels, is always moving forward. I close my eyes and let the sound wash over me, trying to remember the last time this house felt like home. It was a day much like this one, sunlight slanting through the lace curtains, dust motes dancing in the golden glow. Grandpa sat across from me, his hands trembling just enough to make the tea ripple in his cup. He was telling one of his stories, something about his childhood in the old country, about a river that ran so clear you could see the fish darting between the stones. I remember the way his eyes lit up, the way his laughter filled the room, and how, for a moment, I forgot about the worries that had begun to creep in at the edges of our lives. Back then, everything seemed possible. We were a family, bound together by more than blood, by trust, by shared history, by the unspoken promise that we would always look out for one another. My mother was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared lunch, and my Uncle Simon was out in the garden, pruning the rose bushes Grandpa loved so much. There was a sense of peace, a fragile harmony that I took for granted. I sip my tea and the taste is bittersweet. Strange how a single flavor can carry so much weight, how it can transport you back to a time when you still believed in happy endings. I remember the warmth of Grandpa's hand on mine, the way he squeezed my fingers and said, "Ethan, family is everything. Don't ever forget that." I promised him I wouldn't. I meant it too. But promises are easy to make when the world is still whole. The clock chimes, startling me from my reverie. I look around the room, at the faded photographs on the mantel, the worn armchair by the window, the stack of letters tied with a fraying ribbon. Each object is a relic, a piece of the life we once had. I wonder if the house remembers, if it aches the way I do for the days when laughter echoed through these halls, and love was something you could feel in the air. It's hard not to dwell on what's been lost. The arguments, the accusations, the slow unraveling of trust, it all seems so distant now, like a bad dream you can't quite shake. But the pain is real, as sharp and fresh as the day it began. I think about Grandpa, about the faith he placed in us, and I wonder if he saw it coming. Did he know how fragile we really were? Did he sense the fault lines beneath the surface, the cracks that would one day split us apart? I set my cup down and traced the rim with my finger, searching for answers in the delicate pattern of blue flowers. I wish I could go back, just for a moment, to that last peaceful afternoon. I wish I could hold on to the feeling of safety, of belonging, before it all slipped through my fingers. But time only moves in one direction, and regret is a heavy companion. The sun shifts, casting long shadows across the table. I watch as the light fades, as the room grows colder, and I realize that I am alone, not just in this house but in the memories that haunt it. The people I loved are gone, scattered by distance and disappointment, and all that remains are echoes. I pick up my cup, take one last sip, and let the silence settle around me. The taste of tea lingers on my tongue, mingling with the ache in my chest. I close my eyes and ask the question that has haunted me for years, the question that has no easy answer. How did we let it come to this? The memory comes back to me in fragments, like shards of glass catching the light, sharp, beautiful, and dangerous to hold for too long. It was a Sunday, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever, with the promise of spring in the air and the scent of fresh-cut grass drifting through the open windows. The house was alive with the sounds of family, laughter in the hallway, the clatter of dishes in the kitchen, the low hum of conversation that ebbed and flowed like the tide. We gathered in the dining room, sunlight spilling across the tablecloth, painting everything in a warm, forgiving glow. Grandpa sat at the head of the table, his presence commanding but gentle, the kind of man who could silence a room with a single look and then fill it with laughter a moment later. His hair was thinner than I remembered, his hands more unsteady, but his eyes, those sharp blue eyes, missed nothing. My mother, Margaret, hovered near the sideboard, arranging plates with a precision that betrayed her nerves. She glanced at Grandpa every few seconds, as if searching for reassurance, or perhaps for a sign that today would be different. My Uncle Simon lounged in his chair, one arm draped casually over the back, a half smile playing on his lips. He was always the charmer, the one who knew how to say the right thing, how to make people feel seen. But there was an edge to him that day, a restlessness that I couldn't quite place. I took my seat quietly, trying to make myself small, to observe without being noticed. I was old enough to sense the tension, but not old enough to understand its roots. The air was thick with expectation, as if we were all waiting for something to happen, something that would change the shape of our family forever. Grandpa cleared his throat, and the room fell silent. He looked at each of us in turn, his gaze lingering on my mother, then on Simon, and finally on me. "I've been thinking," he began, his voice steady but soft, "about the future, about what comes next." He paused, letting the words settle. "I won't be here forever. It's time we talked about what happens when I'm gone." A hush fell over the table. My mother's hands trembled as she reached for her glass, her knuckles white. Simon leaned forward, his eyes bright with something I couldn't name. I felt a chill run down my spine, though the room was warm. "I've made some decisions," Grandpa continued, "about the house, the money, and most importantly, about my care." He looked at Simon, and I saw a flicker of pride, or maybe relief, cross my uncle's face. "Simon, I want you to take charge. I'm entrusting you with the house, with the funds I've set aside, $1.2 million, and with my well-being. I know you'll do what's right." The words hung in the air, heavy and irrevocable. My mother's face went pale, her lips pressed into a thin line. She opened her mouth as if to protest, but Grandpa held up a hand. "Margaret, you've done so much for me already. You have your own life, your own family to care for. I don't want to be a burden." Simon reached across the table, placing his hand over Grandpa's. "You can count on me, Dad. I'll make sure you're comfortable. I'll take care of everything." His voice was smooth, practiced. But there was a flicker of something else in his eyes, a calculation, a hunger that made my stomach twist. I glanced at my mother, searching her face for a reaction. She looked away, blinking back tears. I wanted to say something, to defend her, to ask why Grandpa had chosen Simon over her, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I watched as the moment passed, as the decision was sealed with a nod and a smile that didn't quite reach Grandpa's eyes. The rest of the afternoon unfolded in a blur. We ate in silence, the clink of silverware loud in the quiet. Simon talked about plans for the house, about renovations and investments, his voice growing more animated with each passing minute. My mother listened politely, but her hands never stopped moving, folding napkins, refilling glasses, anything to keep herself busy. After lunch, Grandpa called me into the study. The room was filled with the scent of old books and pipe tobacco, the walls lined with photographs of a life well lived. He sat behind his desk, his hands folded neatly in front of him. "Ethan," he said, "I know this isn't easy. Change never is. But I need you to trust me. I'm doing what I think is best for everyone." I nodded, though I didn't understand. "Why Simon?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Grandpa sighed, his shoulders sagging. "Your mother has always carried more than her share. I want her to have some peace. Simon, he needs this. Maybe it'll give him a sense of purpose." He looked at me, his eyes searching. "Promise me you'll look out for your mother. She's stronger than she knows, but even the strongest need someone in their corner." I promised, though I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to. I left the study feeling older, as if I'd inherited a burden I didn't know how to carry. The days that followed were marked by a strange, uneasy calm. Simon moved into the house, taking charge with an efficiency that bordered on ruthless. He hired new staff, reorganized the finances, and began making changes, small at first, then more sweeping. My mother visited less often, her excuses growing more elaborate. I watched as the distance between us grew, as the family I'd always known began to unravel. There were moments of hope, brief flashes when it seemed like things might work out. Simon would bring Grandpa his favorite pastries, sit with him in the garden, listen to his stories. But there were also shadows, whispers of arguments behind closed doors, unexplained withdrawals from the bank, a growing sense of unease that settled over the house like a fog. One evening, I found my mother sitting alone on the porch, her eyes fixed on the horizon. "Do you think he made the right choice?" I asked, unsure if I wanted to hear the answer. She smiled, but it was a sad, tired smile. "Your grandfather always did what he thought was best. Sometimes that's all any of us can do." She reached for my hand, squeezing it gently. "We just have to hope it's enough." As the weeks turned into months, the cracks in our family grew wider. Simon became more distant, more preoccupied with the business of managing Grandpa's affairs. My mother withdrew into herself, her visits growing shorter and less frequent. I tried to bridge the gap, to hold us together, but it felt like trying to stop a river with my bare hands. There were moments when I caught Simon watching me, his expression unreadable. He was always polite, always careful, but there was a tension between us, a sense that we were both waiting for something to break. I wondered if he felt the weight of Grandpa's trust, or if he saw it as an opportunity, a chance to finally prove himself. The house itself seemed to change, the walls closing in, the rooms growing colder. Grandpa spent more time in his study, his health declining in ways that were easy to ignore until they weren't. I found myself longing for the days when we were all together, when the future felt like something we could shape with our own hands. One night, as I was leaving the house, I heard voices coming from the study. Simon and Grandpa, their words muffled but urgent. I paused in the hallway, heart pounding, straining to make out what they were saying. I caught only fragments. Responsibility, trust, don't let me down. The door creaked open and Simon stepped out, his face pale, his jaw set. He didn't see me, or if he did, he pretended not to. I stood there for a long time after he left, staring at the closed door, wondering what promises had been made, what secrets were being kept. The house was silent, the only sound the steady ticking of the clock in the hallway. Looking back, I realized that was the moment everything began to change. The promise Grandpa made, the trust he placed in Simon, it was meant to hold us together, to give us a sense of security. But promises are fragile things, easily broken by pride, by fear, by the simple human desire to be seen and valued. As I walked out into the night, the air cool against my skin, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was slipping away, something precious and irreplaceable. I told myself it was just the natural order of things, that families change and people grow apart. But deep down I knew better. There was a storm coming and we were all standing in its path, too proud or too blind to see the warning signs. And as I closed the gate behind me, I couldn't help but wonder, what would become of us now that the promise had been made? It's strange how the biggest changes in life rarely announce themselves with thunder or fanfare. Instead, they creep in quietly, like a draft under a closed door, until one day you realize the whole house is cold. That's how it was with us. The days after Grandpa's promise to Simon blurred together, each one a little less bright than the last, each one carrying a weight I couldn't quite name. At first it was little things. Grandpa, who once insisted on his morning walks, began to sleep later, his steps slower, his voice softer. He'd sit by the window for hours, staring out at the garden as if searching for something he'd lost. When I asked if he wanted company, he'd smile and pat my hand, but his eyes seemed far away. I told myself it was just age, that everyone slows down eventually, but the worry gnawed at me. Simon, meanwhile, was always busy. He'd taken to wearing suits around the house, his phone glued to his ear, his words clipped and efficient. He spoke of investments and renovations, of maximizing assets and streamlining care. The house, once filled with the comforting clutter of family life, began to feel more like an office. The old armchair Grandpa loved disappeared, replaced by a sleek leather recliner. The kitchen was remodeled, the garden replanted with low-maintenance shrubs. Even the family photos vanished from the hallway, replaced by abstract art that meant nothing to any of us. I tried to talk to Simon, to ask about the changes, but he brushed me off with a smile. "It's for Dad's comfort," he'd say. "He deserves the best." But I noticed the way he avoided my eyes, the way his hands tightened around his phone whenever I pressed for details. The staff, too, had changed. The housekeeper who'd been with us for years was let go, replaced by a woman who barely spoke and never lingered. Grandpa's old friend, the gardener, stopped coming by. When I asked why, Simon shrugged. "We need professionals now. It's just easier." The money was another thing. I'd overhear Simon on the phone, discussing accounts and transfers, his voice low and urgent. Once I caught a glimpse of a bank statement on his desk, numbers that didn't make sense, withdrawals that seemed too large, too frequent. When I asked about it, Simon laughed. "You wouldn't understand, Ethan, it's complicated. Trust me, everything's under control." But everything didn't feel under control. My mother noticed it too. She came by less often, her visits always tense, her eyes darting around the house as if searching for something familiar. One afternoon, I found her in Grandpa's room tucking a blanket around his shoulders. He smiled at her, but there was a sadness in his eyes that broke my heart. "Are you all right, Dad?" she asked softly. He nodded, but his hands trembled as he reached for hers. "Just tired, Maggie. That's all." She looked at me over his shoulder, her worry plain. Later in the kitchen, she cornered me. "Something's not right, Ethan. Your uncle, he's changing things too quickly. Your grandfather looks worse every time I see him. Have you noticed?" I nodded, relief and fear mingling in my chest. I have, but Simon won't listen. He says it's all for Grandpa's benefit. She shook her head, her lips pressed tight. Your grandfather never wanted any of this. He liked things the way they were. And the money, Ethan, I know your uncle. He's always been ambitious, but this is different. I can feel it. I wanted to believe she was wrong, that Simon was just overwhelmed, that the changes were necessary. But the doubt lingered, growing heavier with each passing day. The tension in the house became a living thing, pressing in on all of us. Grandpa grew quieter, his laughter fading to a faint echo. Simon became more irritable, snapping at the staff, avoiding family dinners. My mother stopped coming by altogether, saying it was too painful to watch. I found myself wandering the halls at night, unable to sleep, haunted by the sense that something precious was slipping away. One evening, as I was helping Grandpa to bed, he squeezed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. Ethan, he whispered, promise me you'll look after your mother. She's a good woman. Don't let her carry this alone. I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. I promise, Grandpa. He smiled, but there was a shadow in his eyes. Good boy. You always were the steady one. After he fell asleep, I sat in his room listening to the sound of his breathing, the steady tick of the clock on the nightstand. I looked around at the familiar objects, the old lamp, the stack of books, the faded photograph of Grandma on the dresser. It felt like a shrine to a life that was slipping away piece by piece. Restless, I began to tidy up, stacking books, straightening the covers. As I moved a pile of papers from the nightstand, something slipped to the floor, a yellowed envelope worn at the edges, my name written on the front in Grandpa's careful script. My heart pounded as I picked it up, fingers trembling. I hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a letter, the ink faded but legible. I read it slowly, the words sinking in like stones. My dear Ethan, if you're reading this, it means I've grown too tired to say these things aloud. I want you to know how proud I am of you, how much I've cherished our time together. I know things have changed and not all for the better. I worry about Simon. He means well, but sometimes his ambition blinds him. I fear I've put too much on his shoulders, and not enough trust in your mother. If you ever feel something is wrong, trust your instincts. Family is more than money or property. It's love, respect, and honesty. Don't let those things slip away, no matter what happens. With all my love, Grandpa. I sat there for a long time, the letter clutched in my hands, tears stinging my eyes. The words were both a comfort and a warning, a reminder that I wasn't imagining things, that the unease I felt was real. Grandpa had seen it too, the cracks in our foundation, the slow unraveling of everything we'd built together. I folded the letter carefully, tucking it back into the envelope. I knew then that I couldn't ignore what was happening, couldn't pretend that everything was fine. The house was changing, our family was changing, and if I didn't do something, we might lose more than just money or property. We might lose each other. As I left Grandpa's room, the house felt colder, the shadows deeper. I carried the letter with me, a silent promise that I would not let his fears come true. But as I walked down the hallway, past the empty spaces where our memories used to live, I couldn't help but wonder if it was already too late. It happened faster than any of us could have imagined. One morning, I arrived at the house to find the driveway empty, the garden gate swinging open in the wind. The air felt wrong, heavy with a silence that pressed against my chest. I let myself in, calling out for Grandpa, for Simon, for anyone. Only echoes answered. I found Simon in the kitchen, his back to me, hands braced on the counter. He didn't turn when I entered. He's gone, he said, voice flat. My heart stuttered. Gone? What do you mean? Simon finally faced me, his eyes cold and unreadable. Dad's been moved to Willowbrook. It's a good facility. They'll take care of him better than we can here. I stared at him, the words refusing to make sense. You moved him? Without telling anyone? He shrugged as if it were nothing. It was time, Ethan. He needs round-the-clock care. The doctors agreed. I did what was best. I felt anger rising, hot and sharp. You should have talked to us. To Mom, she deserved to know. Simon's jaw tightened. Margaret would have made it emotional. She always does. This was a practical decision. Dad's health comes first. I wanted to shout, to shake him, to demand he bring Grandpa back. But the look in his eyes stopped me. There was no room for argument, no space for family or feeling. Only cold, calculated resolve. I called my mother, my hands shaking. When she answered, I could hear the hope in her voice, the hope I was about to shatter. Mom, Grandpa's not here. Simon moved him to a care home. Willowbrook. There was a long silence, then a sound like something breaking. He didn't even let me say goodbye, she whispered. He promised I'd always be able to see my father. I tried to comfort her, but my words felt hollow. I could hear her crying, the sound tearing through me. "I'm coming over," she said finally, her voice raw. "We need to talk." When she arrived, she looked smaller, older, as if the news had stolen years from her. She walked through the house in a daze, touching the empty chair, the faded photograph, the blanket Grandpa always kept on the sofa. "How could he do this?" she asked, her voice barely more than a breath. "How could Simon just take him away?" I had no answer. All I could do was stand beside her, feeling the weight of our loss settle over us like a shroud. The days that followed were a blur of phone calls, arguments, and accusations. My mother tried to visit Grandpa at Willowbrook, but Simon had already set restrictions, visiting hours, approved guests, a list that somehow didn't include her. She pleaded with the staff, begged Simon to reconsider, but he refused to budge. "It's for his own good," he repeated, as if the words could erase the pain he'd caused. The family fractured. Old wounds reopened, resentments flared. Cousins took sides, aunts and uncles stopped calling. The house, once the heart of our family, became a battleground, empty, echoing, haunted by what we'd lost. I watched my mother fade, her spirit dimming with each passing day. She stopped coming by, stopped calling, stopped fighting. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan," she told me one night, her voice hollow. "I can't keep losing him over and over." I tried to be strong for her, to hold us together, but I felt myself unraveling. I missed Grandpa's stories, his laughter, the way he made even the darkest days seem bearable. I missed the family we used to be. One evening I sat alone in Grandpa's study, the letter he'd written me heavy in my pocket. I read it again, searching for answers, for guidance, for hope. His words echoed in my mind. "If you ever feel something is wrong, trust your instincts." I realized then that I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let Simon's decisions stand unchallenged, couldn't let my mother's heartbreak be the end of our story. There were too many questions, too many things that didn't add up. The money, the changes, the secrecy. I owed it to Grandpa, to my mother, to myself, to find the truth. I stood up, the resolve settling in my bones. I would not let our family be destroyed by silence and suspicion. I would uncover what Simon was hiding, no matter how painful the answers might be. As I left the study, the house felt different, emptier. Yes, but also filled with a new purpose. The betrayal had broken us, but it had also lit a fire in me. I would not let it end here. I would fight for the truth, for my family, for the promise I'd made. I learned quickly that the truth rarely reveals itself all at once. It comes in fragments, in overheard conversations, in numbers that don't add up, in the way people look away when you ask the wrong question. After Grandpa was moved to Willowbrook, I found myself haunted by the feeling that something was deeply wrong. The house felt colder, emptier, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for someone to notice what had been lost. I started with the care facility. Willowbrook was clean and modern, with cheerful staff and bright common rooms. But there was a sterility to it that unsettled me. Grandpa sat by the window, staring out at the garden, his hands folded in his lap. He smiled when he saw me, but the light in his eyes was dimmer, his voice softer. I tried to visit as often as I could, bringing him his favorite pastries, reading aloud from his old books, but I couldn't shake the sense that he was fading, piece by piece. One afternoon, I lingered in the hallway after my visit, watching the nurses as they made their rounds. I introduced myself to a few of them, asking gentle questions about Grandpa's care. Most were polite but distant, their answers rehearsed. But one nurse, a woman named Linda, hesitated when I asked about Simon's visits. "He comes by," she said, glancing over her shoulder, "but not as often as you'd think. Mostly he calls. He's very particular about the schedule. And the money." I pressed her gently, careful not to seem accusatory. "Has there been any trouble? Anything I should know?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "Your grandfather's care plan changed a few weeks ago. Fewer therapy sessions, less time with the activities coordinator. It's not unusual, but, well, it's usually a family decision. This time it was just your uncle." A chill ran through me. I thanked her and left, my mind racing. If only I'd paid closer attention. If only I'd asked more questions sooner. Maybe things would be different. Back at the house, I began to dig through the paperwork Simon had left behind. He'd always been meticulous, but now I noticed gaps, missing receipts, unexplained withdrawals, bills paid late or not at all. I found a stack of bank statements in the study, the numbers circled in red ink. Large sums had been transferred out of Grandpa's account, sometimes to companies I didn't recognize, sometimes directly to Simon's personal account. The amounts were staggering. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I realized how much had already slipped away. I tried to confront Simon, but he was always busy, always just out of reach. When I did catch him, He brushed off my questions with a practiced ease. It's all above board, Ethan. Dad's care is expensive. You wouldn't believe the costs. I'm just making sure everything runs smoothly. But the more I looked, the less sense it made. I started keeping a notebook, jotting down every detail, every date, every odd transaction. I pieced together a timeline, tracing the flow of money, the changes in Grandpa's care, the staff who had come and gone. The pattern was clear. As Simon's control grew, Grandpa's world shrank. I reached out to the old housekeeper, Mrs. Evans, who had been with us for years before Simon let her go. We met at a small cafe, her hands wrapped tightly around a cup of tea. She looked tired, older than I remembered. I didn't want to leave, she said quietly. Your grandfather was always kind to me, but Simon said it was time for a change. He wanted new people, people who wouldn't ask questions. I asked if she'd noticed anything unusual before she left. She nodded. There were meetings in the study late at night. Simon would lock the door. Sometimes I'd hear raised voices. Your mother mostly, begging him to slow down, to think about what your grandfather wanted. But he never listened. He just kept saying it was for the best. Her words echoed in my mind as I walked home. If only I'd listened more closely. If only I'd trusted my instincts instead of hoping things would work themselves out. I spent hours at the bank, poring over statements, asking the manager about the transfers. He was polite but wary, clearly uncomfortable with my questions. Your uncle has power of attorney, he reminded me. He's authorized to make these decisions, but are they the right decisions? I asked, frustration creeping into my voice. He hesitated, then lowered his voice. I can't say, Mr. Carter, but I will tell you this, most families keep better records. There's a lot of movement in these accounts, more than I'd expect. I left the bank with a folder full of copies, my mind spinning. The evidence was there, but it was scattered, hidden beneath layers of paperwork and polite explanations. I needed more. I started calling the companies listed on the statements, pretending to be Simon's assistant. Some were legitimate medical suppliers, home care agencies, but others were shell companies, addresses that led to empty offices or P.O. boxes. The money was vanishing, and no one seemed to notice but me. At night, I lay awake, replaying every conversation, every missed sign. If only I'd acted sooner, if only I'd pushed harder. Maybe Grandpa wouldn't be alone in that sterile room. Maybe my mother wouldn't be grieving a father who was still alive but already lost to her. I visited Grandpa again, determined to find some sign of hope. He was weaker, his hands shaking as he reached for mine. Ethan, he whispered, is everything all right at home? I forced a smile. Everything's fine, Grandpa. I'm just making sure you're comfortable. He nodded, but his eyes searched mine as if he could see the truth I was trying to hide. Don't let them forget me, he said softly. Don't let them take everything. I promised him I wouldn't, but as I left Willowbrook, I felt the weight of my failure pressing down on me. The truth was out there, but it was slippery, elusive, always just out of reach. I called my mother, told her what I'd found. She listened in silence, her breathing ragged. I knew it, she said finally. I knew he was up to something. But what can we do, Ethan? He has all the power. We'll find a way, I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. We have to. The days blurred together as I continued my investigation, each new discovery a fresh wound. I found emails between Simon and a lawyer, discussing ways to protect the estate from unnecessary interference. I found receipts for expensive dinners, trips, gifts, none of which had anything to do with Grandpa's care. I found notes in Simon's handwriting, lists of assets, plans for selling the house, the car, the family heirlooms. If only I'd seen it sooner, if only I'd spoken up before the damage was done. The guilt gnawed at me, a constant reminder of how easily trust can be broken, how quickly a family can fall apart. But I wasn't ready to give up. I gathered my evidence, organized my notes, prepared myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. I owed it to Grandpa, to my mother, to the family we used to be. As I sat in the empty house surrounded by memories and shadows, I made a silent vow. I would not let Simon's betrayal go unanswered. I would fight for the truth, no matter how painful it might be, and I would do everything in my power to make sure that one day we could look back and say we did everything we could, that we didn't let our family slip away without a fight. I found Simon in the study, the same room where Grandpa had once told his stories and shared his wisdom. Now the air felt different, charged, tense, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what was about to happen. Simon was hunched over the desk, rifling through a stack of papers, his brow furrowed in concentration. He didn't look up when I entered, but I could see the tightness in his jaw, the way his shoulders stiffened at the sound of my footsteps. Simon, We need to talk, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. He sighed, not bothering to hide his irritation. If this is about Dad, I don't have time for another guilt trip, Ethan. I'm doing everything I can. I closed the door behind me, refusing to let him brush me off. I've seen the bank statements. The transfers, the shell companies, the money that's disappeared. I've talked to the staff at Willowbrook, to Mrs. Evans, to the bank manager. I know what you've been doing. He finally looked up, his eyes flashing with anger. You've been spying on me? Digging through my business like some kind of detective? This isn't just your business, Simon. This is Grandpa's life. Our family. You were supposed to take care of him, not use his money for your own gain. He slammed his fist on the desk, papers scattering like frightened birds. You think this is easy? You think I wanted any of this? Dad put all the responsibility on me, made me the bad guy, while you and Mom got to play the victims. I'm the one who has to make the hard choices. I felt my own anger rising, years of resentment bubbling to the surface. Hard choices? Is that what you call cutting Grandpa off from his family? Selling off everything he loved? Making decisions behind our backs? You didn't even let Mom say goodbye. Simon's face twisted, a mix of guilt and defiance. She would have made it impossible. She never understood what Dad needed. She just wanted to keep things the same, pretend nothing was changing. But everything was changing, Ethan. Dad was slipping away and someone had to take control. Control? I echoed, my voice trembling. Is that what this is about, control? Or is it about proving something to Grandpa, to yourself, to all of us? He looked away, jaw clenched. You don't know what it's like always being second best? Dad never trusted me, not really. He always thought Mom was the responsible one, the one who could do no wrong. I just wanted a chance to show him I could handle it. That I was worth something. The words hung in the air, raw and unguarded. For a moment I saw the boy Simon used to be, eager for approval, desperate to be seen. But the man standing before me was hardened, his ambition twisted by years of feeling overlooked. I get it, I said quietly. You wanted to prove yourself. But this isn't the way. You've hurt people, Simon. You've hurt Grandpa, Mom, me. You've torn this family apart. He shook his head, eyes shining with unshed tears. You think I don't know that? Every night, I lie awake wondering if I made the right choices. But someone had to do it. Someone had to be strong. Strong? I repeated, my voice breaking. Strong isn't shutting people out. It isn't hiding the truth. It's facing the hard things together, as a family. That's what Grandpa wanted. That's what he trusted you to do. Simon's shoulders slumped, the fight draining out of him. For a moment I thought he might apologize, might finally let down his guard. But then he straightened, his expression hardening once more. It's too late, Ethan. The decisions have been made. The money's gone. Dad's in the best place he can be. There's nothing you can do to change that. I stared at him, feeling the weight of his words settle over me like a shroud. Maybe he was right. Maybe it was too late to fix what had been broken. But I couldn't let it end here, not with so much left unsaid, so much left undone. I'm not giving up, I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. I owe it to Grandpa. I owe it to Mom. I owe it to myself. Simon looked at me, something like regret flickering in his eyes. Do what you have to do, Ethan, but don't expect me to help. The confrontation ended not with a resolution, but with a chasm, wider than ever between us. I left the study feeling more alone than I'd ever felt in my life, the echoes of our argument ringing in my ears. But beneath the loneliness, beneath the pain, was a new resolve. I would not let Simon's choices define our family's future. I would keep searching for the truth, no matter how hard it became. Even if I had to do it alone. The call came just after dawn, the kind of hour when the world is still half asleep and everything feels fragile. I answered on the second ring, my heart already bracing for bad news. It was Willowbrook. Grandpa had taken a turn in the night, breathing shallow, feverish, confused. They were doing everything they could, the nurse assured me, but I should come soon. I hung up, numb, and stared at the ceiling as the first light crept across my bedroom wall. I called my mother, my voice shaking. She was already awake, her words clipped and anxious. I'll meet you there, she said, and I could hear the fear she was trying to hide. We drove in silence, the city passing by in a blur, both of us lost in our own thoughts. When we arrived at Willowbrook, the receptionist looked up, her expression tight. I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter, she said, glancing at her computer. Your name isn't on the approved visitor list. I can't let you in. My mother's face crumpled. He's my father. Please just let me see him. The receptionist shook her head, apologetic but unmoved. I'm sorry. You'll have to speak with Mr. Simon Carter. He's the only one authorized to make changes. I felt a surge of anger, hot and helpless. This is ridiculous. He's dying and you're keeping his own daughter away? The woman looked away, her hands trembling as she typed. I'm just following instructions. My mother turned to me, her eyes shining with tears she refused to let fall. Call your uncle, she said, her voice brittle. Tell him if he has any decency left, he'll let me say goodbye. I tried, but Simon didn't answer. I left message after message, my words growing more desperate each time. No response. My mother sat in the car, staring straight ahead, her hands clenched in her lap. I wanted to comfort her, to promise her it would be all right, but the words felt empty. There was nothing I could do. Inside, Grandpa was fading. I sat by his bed, holding his hand, listening to the rasp of his breath. He drifted in and out of sleep, sometimes squeezing my fingers, sometimes mumbling words I couldn't quite catch. I told him stories from my childhood, stories he'd once told me, hoping the sound of my voice would bring him some peace. I wanted to believe he knew I was there, that he could feel my love even as the world slipped away. The days blurred together. My mother called every morning, asking for news, her voice growing smaller with each unanswered plea. I watched her grief harden into something sharp and silent, a wound that wouldn't heal. The rest of the family kept their distance, unsure what to say, afraid to take sides. The house felt emptier than ever, haunted by the echoes of what we'd lost. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into Grandpa's old study. The room was just as he'd left it, books stacked on the desk, a faded photograph of Grandma on the wall, the scent of pipe tobacco lingering in the air. I sat in his chair, running my hands over the worn leather, searching for some trace of comfort. That's when I found the diary. It was tucked behind a row of books, the cover cracked and faded. Grandpa's name written in careful script. I hesitated, then opened it, the pages soft and thin beneath my fingers. The entries were simple, sometimes just a few lines, sometimes whole pages. He wrote about the weather, about the garden, about the ache in his bones that never quite went away. But as I read, I found more fragments of his heart, his fears, his hopes for us. Simon is trying so hard, one entry read. I wish I could tell him he doesn't have to prove anything. I wish I could tell Margaret I'm proud of her, that I see how much she's given. I worry I've made mistakes. I hope they'll forgive me. Another entry written in shaky handwriting caught my breath. Family is trust. Without it, we're just strangers living under the same roof. I want them to remember the good times, not the arguments. I want them to find their way back to each other. I read on, tears blurring the words. There were regrets, missed chances, harsh words spoken in anger, moments he wished he could take back. But there was hope too. Hope that we would heal, that we would remember what mattered most. The last entry was dated just a week before he was moved to Willowbrook. If you're reading this, Ethan, I hope you know how much I love you. I hope you'll forgive me for the choices I made. I did my best. Take care of your mother. Take care of each other. I closed the diary, holding it to my chest, feeling the weight of his words settle over me. I wished I could go back, could tell him that I understood, that I forgave him, that I would do everything I could to honor his wishes. But all I could do was sit in the darkness, listening to the silence, and promise myself that I wouldn't let his hopes die with him. The next morning, as I was leaving the house, I found an envelope wedged in the mailbox. My name was written on the front in a formal, unfamiliar hand. I tore it open, my heart pounding. Inside was a letter from a law firm. You are hereby requested to attend the reading of the last will and testament of Mr. Harold Carter. It read, all immediate family members are required to be present. The reading will take place at 10 a.m. on Friday. I stood on the porch, the letter trembling in my hands, 1,000 questions racing through my mind. What would Grandpa's final wishes be? What secrets would come to light? Would this be the moment that finally tore us apart, or the one that brought us back together? I looked up at the sky, the first rays of sunlight breaking through the clouds, and felt the weight of everything that had come before. The pain, the regret, the hope. I knew that whatever happened next, nothing would ever be the same. And as I closed the door behind me, I realized that the story of our family was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning. The morning of the will reading dawned gray and heavy, the sky threatening rain. I arrived at the law office early, my nerves raw, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. The building was old, its stone steps worn smooth by decades of footsteps, and as I climbed them, I felt the weight of history pressing down on me. This was where the final chapter of Grandpa's story would be told, where the choices he'd made would echo through the rest of our lives. Inside, the waiting room was hushed, the air thick with tension. My mother sat by the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap, her face pale but composed. She looked up as I entered, offering a small, brave smile. I sat beside her, squeezing her hand, feeling the tremor in her fingers. Across the room, Simon stood alone, staring out at the street, his jaw set, his eyes shadowed. He didn't acknowledge us, and I didn't try to bridge the distance. There was too much between us now, anger, regret, things left unsaid. Other family members trickled in. Aunt Ruth, her lips pressed in a thin line. Cousin Mark, shifting uncomfortably in his chair. A few others I barely recognized, all drawn by the gravity of Grandpa's final wishes. No one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, each second stretching out longer than the last. At precisely 10 o'clock, the door to the conference room opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped out. "The Carter family?" he asked, his voice calm and measured. "If you'll follow me, please." We filed into the room, taking our seats around a long, polished table. The lawyer, Mr. Bennett, his nameplate read, sat at the head, a thick folder in front of him. He waited until everyone was settled, then cleared his throat. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time. Your father, Mr. Harold Carter, left very specific instructions regarding the distribution of his estate. I will read his will in its entirety as he requested." He opened the folder, his eyes scanning the first page. "To my beloved family, I hope you will listen to these words with open hearts. I have tried to do what is right, though I know I have not always succeeded. My greatest wish is that you find peace with one another, and that you remember the love that binds us, even when it is hard to see." A hush fell over the room. I glanced at Simon, whose face was unreadable, and at my mother, who blinked back tears. Mr. Bennett continued, "To my son, Simon Carter, I leave the sum of $1 million, as well as the family home, on the condition that he fulfills the following requirements. He must ensure that my daughter, Margaret Carter, has unrestricted access to the house and to my personal effects for as long as she wishes. He must also provide a full accounting of all financial transactions related to my care, to be reviewed by an independent auditor. If these conditions are not met within 6 months, the inheritance will be forfeited and distributed equally among my grandchildren." A ripple of shock moved through the room. Simon's face flushed, his hands tightening into fists. He opened his mouth as if to protest, but Mr. Bennett held up a hand. "There is more," he said, turning the page. "To my daughter, Margaret Carter, I leave the sum of $200,000, as well as my late wife's wedding ring and the contents of my study. These are not great riches, but they are symbols of my love and gratitude for all you have done. I hope you will find comfort in them." My mother pressed a hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I reached for her, feeling my own eyes sting. Mr. Bennett continued, his voice gentle. "To my grandson, Ethan Carter, I leave my personal diaries and letters, in the hope that he will remember our conversations and carry forward the lessons I tried to teach. Trust him to keep our family's stories alive." I felt a lump rise in my throat. The diaries were more than paper and ink. They were Grandpa's heart, his memories, his legacy. I nodded, unable to speak. The lawyer paused, then unfolded a handwritten letter, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. "Your father asked that I read this aloud," he began, his voice soft but clear. "My dearest family, if you are hearing these words, it means I am gone. I know there has been pain between us, and I am sorry for the ways I contributed to it. I made choices I thought were best, but I see now that I did not always listen as I should have. I ask you with all my heart to forgive one another. Do not let anger or pride keep you apart. Life is too short for grudges. Remember the laughter, the shared meals, the moments of kindness. These are what matter." He paused, letting the words settle. The room was silent, every eye fixed on him. "I have placed conditions on my gifts not to punish but to encourage you to do what is right. Simon, I know you have felt the weight of responsibility, and I am proud of your efforts even when we disagreed. Margaret, you have been my anchor, my comfort. Ethan, you are the bridge between us. I hope you will help our family find its way back to each other." The letter ended simply, "With love, always, Dad." Mr. Bennett folded the letter, his eyes shining with emotion. "That concludes the reading of the will. If there are any questions, I will do my best to answer them." For a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was thick, heavy with the weight of everything that had been said and everything that hadn't. Simon stared at the table, his jaw clenched, his eyes wet. My mother wept quietly, clutching the ring in her hand. I sat between them, feeling the ache of loss and the fragile hope of something new. Finally, Simon spoke, his voice rough. He always had to have the last word, didn't he? My mother looked at him, her expression softening. "He just wanted us to be a family again." Simon nodded, wiping his eyes. "I don't know if I can fix what I've done, but I'll try." I looked at both of them, feeling the first stirrings of forgiveness, of possibility. Grandpa's words echoed in my mind. Do not let anger or pride keep you apart. As we left the law office, the rain finally began to fall, gentle and steady, washing the dust from the streets. I walked between my mother and my uncle, the three of us silent but together, the first fragile steps toward healing. Grandpa was gone, but his love remained, a thread that bound us even in our brokenness. And as we stepped out into the gray morning, I knew that somehow we would find our way forward. The weeks after the will reading passed in a haze of paperwork, meetings, and uneasy silences. Simon tried to comply with Grandpa's conditions, but the truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how carefully it's hidden. The independent auditor arrived, a quiet woman with sharp eyes and a calm, methodical manner. She pored over every document, every bank statement, every receipt Simon could produce. I watched the process unfold with a strange mix of dread and relief, knowing that the answers we'd all been avoiding were finally coming to light. It didn't take long for the discrepancies to appear. The auditor's questions grew more pointed, her requests more specific. Simon grew defensive, his explanations thin and hurried. The shell companies, the missing funds, the unauthorized transfers, one by one. The pieces fell into place. The evidence was undeniable. Simon had breached the trust Grandpa had placed in him, using the money for his own purposes, hiding the truth from the rest of us. The day the auditor delivered her report, the family gathered once more in the old house. The air was thick with tension, the walls echoing with memories of better times. My mother sat at the table, her hands folded, her face calm but resolute. I stood beside her, the weight of the past months pressing down on me. Simon entered last, his shoulders hunched, his eyes shadowed with shame. The auditor spoke plainly, her voice steady. Mr. Simon Carter, you have failed to meet the conditions set forth in your father's will. The breach of trust is clear. As a result, your inheritance is forfeit. The assets will be distributed as directed, to Margaret Carter and her children. For a moment, no one moved. Simon stared at the floor, his face pale. The silence was heavy, filled with the ache of betrayal and the sting of justice finally served. My mother closed her eyes, a single tear slipping down her cheek, not for the money, but for the brother she'd lost to pride and ambition. Simon looked up, his voice barely more than a whisper. I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I wanted to prove I could do it, that I was worth something. My mother reached across the table, her hand trembling as she covered his. You are worth something, Simon. Not because of money or houses or any of this. Because you're my brother. Because you're family. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do next. He shook his head, tears spilling over. I don't deserve forgiveness. She squeezed his hand, her voice gentle but firm. Maybe not, but you deserve a chance to make things right. If you want it. The room was quiet, the wounds between us raw and exposed. But in that silence, something shifted. A softening, a letting go. I saw it in the way Simon looked at my mother. In the way she refused to turn away from him. In the way I felt my own anger begin to loosen its grip. We talked late into the night. The three of us sharing memories, regrets, hopes for the future. Simon admitted to everything, his words halting but honest. My mother listened, her forgiveness not easy but real. I found myself speaking up, not to accuse, but to remind us all of what Grandpa had wanted, for us to find our way back to each other. To remember that family is more than the sum of our failures. In the days that followed, the house began to feel different. The shadows lingered, but there was light too, a sense that maybe we could rebuild. Simon offered to help with Grandpa's memorial, to sort through his things, to be present in a way he hadn't been for years. My mother accepted, not with blind trust, but with cautious hope. The rest of the family watched, some skeptical, some quietly supportive. Old wounds don't heal overnight, but the seeds of forgiveness had been planted. We gathered for meals, for quiet evenings in the garden, for moments of laughter that felt like small miracles. I thought often of Grandpa, of the lessons he'd tried to teach us, of the love he'd left behind. Justice had been served, but it wasn't the cold, punishing kind. It was justice tempered by mercy, by the chance for redemption, by the hope that we could be more than our mistakes. As summer turned to autumn, the house filled with new memories, softer, gentler, shaped by the hard-won understanding that family is a choice we make again and again. Simon was different now, quieter, humbler, grateful for the second chance he'd been given. My mother was stronger, her dignity intact, her heart open to the possibility of healing. And I, for the first time in a long while, felt at peace. The past would always be a part of us, but it didn't have to define us. We had been broken, yes, but we were also mending. And in that slow, imperfect process, I found hope. Not just for our family, but for myself. Forgiveness, I've learned, is not a single act but a journey, one that winds through old hurts and silent dinners, through awkward apologies and hesitant laughter. In the weeks after Simon lost his inheritance, the house felt both emptier and strangely lighter, as if the truth had swept through and cleared away the dust of secrets. But the wounds were still fresh and the path forward was anything but clear. Simon kept his distance at first. He moved into a small apartment across town, his calls infrequent, his voice always tinged with regret. I could hear the shame in every conversation, the way he struggled to find the right words, the way he hesitated before asking about Mom or Grandpa's things. My mother, for her part, never spoke ill of him. She kept her pain private, tending to the house and the garden, finding comfort in routine. But I saw the way she lingered by the phone, the way her eyes softened when his name came up, the way she left the porch light on just in case. The first holiday after Grandpa's passing was the hardest. Thanksgiving had always been his favorite. He'd carve the turkey with a flourish, tell the same stories year after year, his laughter filling every corner of the house. That year the table felt too big, the silence too loud. I almost didn't invite Simon, afraid of reopening old wounds, but Mom insisted. "He's still family," she said quietly. "Who needs to know there's a place for him here?" Simon arrived late, carrying a pie he'd bought from the bakery down the street. He stood in the doorway, uncertain, his hands shaking as he offered the dessert. For a moment, no one moved. Then Mom crossed the room and hugged him, holding on longer than she needed to. Simon's shoulders shook and I realized he was crying. The rest of us looked away, giving them a moment to find their footing. Dinner was awkward at first, conversation stilted, everyone careful not to say the wrong thing. But as the meal went on, the old rhythms began to return. Simon told a story about getting lost on the way over. Mom laughed at his terrible sense of direction, and I found myself smiling, the tension easing just a little. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. After dinner, Simon and I stood on the porch, watching the last leaves fall from the maple tree. He stared at his hands, searching for words. "I don't know how to make up for what I did," he said finally. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I want to try." I thought of Grandpa's diary, of the entries about trust and regret, about hope for reconciliation. "Trying is enough," I said. "We can't change the past, but we can decide what comes next." The months that followed were filled with small steps. Simon came by to help in the garden, to fix a leaky faucet, to share a cup of coffee on Sunday mornings. Sometimes he'd bring old photographs he'd found, and we'd sit together, remembering the people we'd been before everything fell apart. There were setbacks, old arguments resurfacing, moments when the pain felt too raw to ignore. But each time we found our way back to the table, to the porch, to the quiet understanding that forgiveness is a choice we make over and over. Mom was the heart of it all. She welcomed Simon with gentle patience, never rushing him, never demanding more than he could give. She listened when he needed to talk, offered advice when he asked, and let him find his own way back. I watched her, amazed by her strength, her capacity for compassion. She taught me that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, but about choosing to see the person behind the mistake, to believe in the possibility of change. As the seasons turned, the family began to gather again. Birthdays, anniversaries, even just Sunday dinners, each occasion a chance to practice being together, to rebuild what had been broken. The house filled with laughter and stories, with the clatter of dishes and the warmth of shared memories. There were still empty chairs, still moments when the loss of Grandpa felt sharp and sudden. But there was also hope, a sense that slowly we were becoming a family again. Simon changed too. He was quieter, more thoughtful, quick to apologize when he slipped, eager to help in any way he could. He never asked for praise, never tried to explain away his actions. He simply showed up again and again, letting his presence speak for him. Over time, the rest of the family began to trust him again, their anger softening into acceptance, their suspicion giving way to cautious affection. I found my own peace in the small things, in the way Mom smiled when Simon made her tea, in the way Simon raked the leaves without being asked, in the way we all sat together at the end of a long day, content in each other's company. I realized that forgiveness isn't a destination, but a journey we walk together, one step at a time. On the anniversary of Grandpa's passing, we gathered in the garden he loved so much. We planted a new rose bush in his memory, its petals a deep, hopeful red. As we stood together, hands joined, I felt the weight of the past lift, replaced by something lighter, something like grace. We were still healing, still learning, still finding our way, but we were together, And in that togetherness, I found the strength to believe in second chances, in the power of forgiveness and in the quiet, enduring love that makes a family whole. The house is quieter now, but it's a different kind of quiet, one that feels gentle, not empty. The echoes of old arguments have faded, replaced by the soft hum of everyday life. I stand in the kitchen, pouring tea into 3 mismatched cups, the steam curling up in the golden afternoon light. The scent of bergamot fills the air, mingling with the faint aroma of fresh-baked bread. Outside, the garden is alive with color, the rosebush we planted for Grandpa blooming in a riot of red. My mother sits at the table, her hands wrapped around her cup, her eyes bright with the wisdom and weariness of a woman who has weathered many storms. Simon sits across from her, his posture relaxed, a quiet smile on his face. There are lines on his brow that weren't there before, but there's a softness too, a humility that comes from having lost and found his way back. I set the last cup down and take my seat, feeling the warmth of the tea seep into my palms. For a moment, none of us speaks. We listen to the ticking of the old clock in the hallway, the distant laughter of children playing outside, the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. It's a simple scene, but it feels sacred, a testament to everything we've survived, everything we've rebuilt. I look at my mother, remembering the days when her grief was a living thing, sharp and unyielding. I remember the nights she sat by the window, waiting for a call that never came, the mornings she moved through the house like a ghost. Now there's a lightness in her, a quiet joy that comes from knowing she did not let bitterness take root. She forgave, not because it was easy, but because she understood that holding on to pain only makes it grow. Simon catches my eye and offers a small, grateful nod. There was a time when I thought I'd never trust him again, never see him as anything but the architect of our family's undoing. But time has a way of softening even the deepest wounds. He's shown up day after day, not with grand gestures but with small acts of kindness, a repaired fence, a home-cooked meal, a willingness to listen. He's learned that love isn't something you can demand or buy, something you earn one moment at a time. I take a sip of tea, letting the warmth settle in my chest. I think of Grandpa, of the lessons he tried to teach us about dignity, about forgiveness, about the importance of family. He wasn't a perfect man. He made mistakes just like the rest of us, but he loved us fiercely, and in the end that love was enough to bring us back together. I remember the letter he left, the words that echoed through the darkest days. Do not let anger or pride keep you apart. Life is too short for grudges. I carry those words with me, a compass for the days when forgiveness feels impossible, when the past threatens to pull me under. I've learned that dignity isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise, how you choose to treat others when you have every reason to turn away. As I look around the table, I see not just the people we are now, but the people we've been, the frightened, angry, grieving versions of ourselves and the hopeful, healing ones too. I see the strength it took for my mother to open her heart again, the courage it took for Simon to admit his mistakes, the patience it took for me to let go of my own resentment. I see a family, imperfect but whole, bound together by something stronger than blood. The afternoon sun shifts, casting long shadows across the table. My mother reaches for Simon's hand, squeezing it gently. He smiles, his eyes shining with gratitude. I feel a lump rise in my throat, a mix of sorrow and joy, of all the things we've lost and all the things we've found. I want to say something profound, something that will capture the enormity of what we've been through. But the words that come are simple, honest. I'm glad we're here, I say softly. I'm glad we found our way back. My mother nods, her voice steady. Me too, Ethan, me too. Simon clears his throat, his voice rough with emotion. I know I can't change the past, but I'm grateful for this chance. For both of you. We sit in silence, letting the moment settle around us. There's no need for more words. The tea grows cold in our cups, but none of us moves to refill it. We're content to simply be together, to savor the peace we've fought so hard to find. As the afternoon drifts toward evening, I find myself thinking of all the families out there. Families who have been broken by betrayal, by loss, by the slow erosion of trust. I think of the women who have carried burdens in silence, the men who have struggled to prove their worth, the children who have watched from the sidelines, longing for a place to belong. I think of the stories we tell ourselves, the ones that keep us apart, and the ones that can bring us home. If you're listening to this, if you've ever felt the sting of betrayal or the ache of loneliness, I want you to know you're not alone. Families are messy, complicated, and sometimes unbearably hard, but they are also resilient, capable of healing in ways that defy logic and expectation. Forgiveness is not a gift you give to others, it's a gift you give to yourself. a way to lay down the weight of anger and make room for something new. Maybe your story isn't finished yet. Maybe there's still time to reach out, to say the words you've been holding back, to offer a second chance. Maybe the person you've lost is waiting for you, just as you are waiting for them. Or maybe, like us, you'll find that the path to healing is slow, uneven, and full of setbacks, but worth every step. I invite you to share your story, to let your voice be heard. There is power in speaking the truth, in naming your pain and celebrating your victories, no matter how small. We are all connected by the threads of love and loss, by the hope that we can be more than the sum of our mistakes. As I pour the last cup of tea, I look at my mother and my brother, and I know that we are not the same people we were when this story began. We are stronger, softer, more forgiving. We have learned that dignity is not about pride, but about compassion. That forgiveness is not weakness, but strength. That family is not a guarantee, but a choice we make again and again every day. The house is quiet, but it is full of memories, of laughter, of the promise that no matter what comes, we will face it together. And as the sun sets, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I raise my cup in silent gratitude for the past, for the present, and for the future we are still building, one cup of tea at a time.